The long road stretched before him, endless ribbons of asphalt cutting through the Virginia countryside. Sergeant Daniel Hayes tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the highway signs grew familiar, the ones he used to pass every weekend before deployment. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the passenger seat, and his duffel bag sat in the back, but his mind wasn't on the gear he carried. It was on the 7-year-old girl waiting at home who hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Daniel had rehearsed this moment in his head 1,000 times while overseas. He pictured Emily's wide smile, the way her arms would wrap around his neck, her voice squealing with excitement. For months that image had carried him through sandstorms, sleepless nights, and the noise of combat boots on metal floors. Now he was minutes away from turning the dream into reality. His heart thumped with anticipation, the kind of nervous joy that felt like stepping into sunlight after too long in the dark. He slowed down as he reached the familiar streets of his old neighborhood. Maple trees lined the sidewalks, their leaves already tinged with the early hues of autumn. Children rode bicycles near driveways, the sound of their laughter drifting through the air. Houses with white fences stood quietly under the afternoon sky, each carrying its own story of families, dinners, and long nights. Daniel's chest tightened. He had missed all of this, the calm rhythm of American suburbia, the ordinary life he had promised to protect. Inside him, however, another voice stirred. The soldier in him whispered reminders. Don't get too comfortable. Don't expect perfection. Don't drop your guard. Years of training had carved that mindset deep into his bones. Yet today he wanted nothing more than to lower every defense and just be Emily's dad again. As the car pulled up near the house where Emily now lived with her mother, Daniel parked and sat for a moment, staring at the front porch. His hands trembled slightly. He whispered, "All right, soldier. Time to see your girl." But before the story continues, let me pause here. If you're moved by what's unfolding, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Real, raw, and powerful journeys of family, resilience, and love. Taking a steady breath, Daniel stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the gravel. The house looked the same as it had years ago, though a new wreath hung on the door. He imagined Emily inside, maybe coloring at the kitchen table, maybe playing with her dolls. He smiled at the thought, the nervousness blending with excitement. He knocked softly, his knuckles tapping against the door. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then footsteps approached, quick and light, followed by the sound of the door opening, and there she was, Emily. Her brown hair tied into pigtails, her eyes wide and glistening, her little voice breaking into the sweetest cry of surprise. "Daddy!" Daniel dropped to his knees as she ran into his arms. The embrace was everything he had hoped for. Her warmth, her laughter, the way she clung to him as if she never wanted to let go. His heart nearly burst with relief and happiness. He whispered, "I've missed you so much, baby girl." For a few seconds it was perfect, exactly as he had dreamed. The long months apart dissolved into this single reunion. But then, as he pulled back to look at her face, the joy froze in his chest. His eyes locked on the faint purple marks across her left cheek. Bruises small but undeniable, marring the soft skin of a child who should have known only safety. His hands stilled, his breath caught. Emily smiled nervously, as if trying to hide what was obvious. But Daniel couldn't unsee it. A storm of questions exploded in his mind, each one darker than the last. The joy of reunion had shattered into a chilling uncertainty. And in that fragile moment, standing on the porch with his daughter in his arms, Daniel Hayes realized his battle at home was only just beginning. Daniel's arms trembled as he held Emily close, the warmth of her small body pressed against his chest. The smell of her strawberry shampoo filled his senses, a scent he had longed for during endless nights abroad. For a fleeting moment, the world outside that doorstep vanished. Yet those bruises on her cheek clung to his thoughts like shadows, staining the joy he had carried home. "Daddy, you came back." Emily's voice was high with delight, her words tumbling over themselves in excitement. "I promised I would," he whispered, forcing a smile to reassure her, even as unease gnawed at him. He brushed her hair gently, trying not to let his fingers linger near the mark on her face. Behind them, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, painting the neighborhood in hues of gold and orange. The gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, distant laughter from kids playing down the street, and the faint hum of traffic. It was a scene that should have been peaceful, yet Daniel's heartbeat drummed heavy with suspicion. Emily pulled back and grabbed his hand. "Come inside, Daddy. I want to show you my room. I put up drawings." Her smile was wide, eager, desperate almost, as though she wanted to distract him. Daniel let her lead him inside, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The house felt different from the one he remembered. Family photos were rearranged, new furniture sat in the living room, a blanket carelessly thrown over the couch. It was familiar and foreign all at once. As Emily pulled him toward the hallway, Daniel caught a glimpse of her eyes. Beneath her joy there was something else, something guarded. She laughed brightly, but her laughter seemed rehearsed, as though she had practiced it in front of a mirror. He knelt beside her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, sweetheart, those marks on your cheek, did you fall?" Emily froze for half a second before nodding quickly. "Yeah, I tripped on the playground. It was silly." She forced another smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel studied her face, every muscle twitch, every flicker in her gaze. He had spent years reading people in high-pressure situations, spotting lies under duress. Something about Emily's explanation didn't fit, but he swallowed his questions. Pressing now could push her further into silence. Instead, he smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. "Accidents happen, huh? You've got to be more careful." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as though relieved he didn't press harder. She tugged him again, guiding him toward her room. Inside, crayon drawings covered the walls, flowers, animals, and one picture of a tall figure in uniform holding hands with a smaller girl. His throat tightened as he realized she had drawn him, even when he wasn't there. "For you kept drawing me," Daniel murmured. Emily beamed. "Of course, I knew you'd come back. I told everyone at school my daddy's the bravest soldier." He felt pride swell in his chest, but the bruise lingered in his vision like a cruel reminder. He wanted to hold on to the joy of her words, yet a darker current tugged beneath. As she showed him her toys and introduced him to stuffed animals lined across her bed, Daniel forced himself to laugh and engage. He wanted her to feel safe, to know nothing could take this moment away from her. Still, when she turned her head just enough for the light to fall on her cheek, the mark glared back at him, sharp against her delicate skin. Inside, he made a vow he hadn't spoken aloud. Whatever truth lay behind those bruises, he would uncover it. No battlefield had ever frightened him as much as the possibility that his daughter wasn't safe. Emily hugged him once more, her small arms wrapping tightly. "Don't go away again, Daddy, promise?" Daniel's voice broke as he answered, "I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." But in his heart, he knew the reunion had raised more questions than it answered. That night, after Emily finally drifted to sleep, Daniel sat on the edge of the couch in silence. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of a wall clock that seemed far too loud. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale from pressure. The image of Emily's bruised cheek replayed in his mind over and over, each time stabbing deeper than the last. He had imagined many outcomes when coming home: tears of joy, long hugs, maybe even a bit of awkwardness after months apart. But never this. Never the sinking fear that his daughter was hiding something too painful to say out loud. The next morning, Daniel woke early and found Emily at the kitchen table, her small hands gripping a crayon as she colored. The bruise looked darker in the daylight, his chest clenched at the sight. "Morning, Daddy," she chirped without looking up from her paper. "Morning, sweetheart." He pulled a chair beside her, watching as she scribbled bright orange lines across the page. "Your cheek still hurts?" Emily shook her head quickly. "Nope, it's fine." She forced a grin, but her little hand trembled slightly as she drew. I need you to tell me the truth," Daniel said softly, keeping his tone gentle. "Did someone hurt you?" Her crayon stopped mid-line. She kept her eyes fixed on the paper, her lips pressing tightly together. After a long pause, she whispered, "It was an accident." "What kind of accident?" She shrugged, refusing to look at him. I fell. That's all. Daniel leaned back, frustration and worry mixing inside him. He had interrogated men overseas who were trained to resist giving answers, and even then he had found cracks in their words. But looking at his daughter, he felt powerless. He couldn't push her like a soldier. She wasn't someone to break down, she was someone to protect. Later, as the day went on, Daniel noticed other details. Emily flinched slightly when the door slammed shut. When he raised his voice only a little, just calling her name down the hall, her shoulders tensed. Small things, but telling. At lunch, she pushed her food around without eating much. "Not hungry," she muttered. "You used to love peanut butter sandwiches," Daniel reminded her, trying to sound light-hearted. "I still do," she answered quickly, but didn't take a bite. He watched her closely, every small gesture feeding his suspicion. She was hiding something and she was terrified of letting it out. That evening, while Emily played quietly in her room, Daniel stepped outside to breathe. The cool air brushed against his skin, the sky painted with streaks of pink and fading blue. He clenched his jaw. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, that those bruises weren't just playground accidents. Yet he had no proof, no answers, only a growing fear. When Emily later came to sit beside him on the porch, she leaned against his arm and whispered, "I'm glad you're here." Daniel wrapped an arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "Me too, baby girl. More than anything." But as he held her close, her earlier silence weighed heavier than her words. She wasn't ready to tell him the truth, and he couldn't force it. Not yet. That night, long after Emily had fallen asleep again, Daniel sat in the dim light of the living room staring at the ceiling. His mind churned with questions that refused to rest. Who or what had put fear in his daughter's eyes? Why did she shut down every time he asked? And how long had this been happening while he was thousands of miles away? He didn't have the answers. But he knew one thing with certainty. He would not stop until he found them. Daniel knew the time had come. He couldn't keep circling around questions with Emily forever. To find the truth, he needed to confront the adults in her world, no matter how unpleasant it became. The next day, with his heart heavy but his steps firm, he went back to the house where Rachel now lived with their daughter. Rachel opened the door, surprised to see him standing there so soon after his unannounced return. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, exhaustion clear in her eyes. She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame. "Daniel, I didn't expect you. I thought you'd at least call first." "Didn't think I needed an invitation to check on my daughter," he answered flatly. Her sigh carried years of history, broken promises, arguments. A marriage that had once burned with passion but collapsed under the weight of distance and deployments. "She's fine," Rachel muttered, her voice defensive. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She has bruises on her face. That doesn't look fine to me." Before Rachel could answer, a man stepped into the hallway. Mark. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that seemed more rehearsed than genuine, he extended his hand toward Daniel. "You must be the famous soldier, Mark Collins." Daniel didn't take his hand. He kept his eyes locked on the man, searching for any trace of guilt. "Yeah, that's me." Mark smirked slightly, withdrawing his hand. "Emily's a sweet kid. We've been doing our best around here while you were away. You know, life doesn't stop when someone goes overseas." The words stung, laced with a subtle jab that cut deeper than Daniel cared to admit. His fists itched to tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I appreciate anyone who looks after my daughter. But someone needs to explain those bruises." Rachel stepped in quickly, her voice sharp. "Daniel, it was an accident. She told me herself. You've been gone a long time. You don't get to march back in and accuse people." His eyes flicked between them, searching Rachel's face. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think she wouldn't dismiss something serious. But the way she defended Mark so quickly set his nerves on edge. "Emily's only 7, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "She's not supposed to carry secrets like that." Mark chuckled softly, almost dismissively. "Kids fall, Daniel. She's clumsy, always running around. Don't read into things that aren't there." Daniel turned toward Rachel. You trust him with her? Rachel's shoulders tensed. He's good to me. He's good to her. We're trying to build something stable, something you couldn't give us with your deployments. Her words cut sharper than intended, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt the weight of guilt pressing down. She wasn't entirely wrong. His duty had taken him away too many times, leaving Rachel alone to raise Emily. But guilt didn't erase responsibility. He looked toward the living room, where Emily sat quietly on the couch, hugging a stuffed bear to her chest. Her wide eyes flicked nervously between the adults, her small body shrinking into the cushions as though she wished to disappear. Daniel's chest ached at the sight. He wanted to rush to her to tell her everything would be all right, but Emily's silence spoke louder than words. Finally, Daniel said, I'm not going to fight with you right now, but I need you to understand something. My priority is Emily. If she's hurt, I will find out why. Rachel's face hardened, torn between anger and fatigue. Then do it without tearing this family apart, Mark added smoothly. Maybe focus on being here now instead of on what you missed. Daniel didn't answer. He simply looked once more at his daughter, her small fingers gripping the bear tightly, her eyes pleading for safety. In that moment, he knew this wasn't just about bruises. It was about trust, about broken bonds, and about a silent cry that no one else seemed willing to hear, and Daniel vowed he would. Daniel drove aimlessly for a while after leaving Rachel's house, his mind a storm of unanswered questions. Streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the neighborhood, their glow reflecting off the windshield like cold reminders of how far from clarity he still was. He wanted to storm back inside, demand explanations until someone broke, but a voice inside him warned that rushing would only push Emily deeper into fear and maybe even put her in more danger. He pulled into the driveway of his sister's home. Amanda had always been his anchor, the one who reminded him of balance when his temper threatened to overtake reason. She opened the door with a soft smile, her arms wrapping him in a hug before she even spoke. You look like you've been carrying the world again, she said, ushering him inside. Daniel sank into the couch, rubbing his hands over his face. It's Emily. I came home to surprise her and she had bruises. She won't talk about it. Rachel keeps defending that guy she's with. Amanda's expression hardened. Mark? Daniel nodded. Something about him doesn't sit right with me, but Rachel, she's blind to it. Maybe she wants to believe she finally found stability. Amanda sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Danny, you can't go charging in like you're still overseas. Here, one wrong move and the court could strip you of custody rights. You need to be smart. The words landed heavy. He hated it, but she was right. He wasn't dealing with enemy combatants. He was dealing with custody laws, fragile trust, and a daughter caught in the middle. So what do I do? Sit back and watch? No, Amanda said firmly. You gather proof, you watch, you listen, and you make sure Emily knows she can come to you without fear. That's how you protect her without losing her. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Feels like I've been trained for every battlefield but this one. Amanda reached for his hand. This is the one that matters most. Her words settled into him like a steadying weight. For years he had relied on orders, on structure, on mission clarity. Now his mission was his daughter, and the rules of engagement were patience and persistence. Later that night, Daniel drove back to the modest apartment he had rented near base. Sleep didn't come easily. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, his thoughts looping back to Emily's nervous smile, the way she flinched at small noises. It wasn't just about bruises. It was about fear, the kind a child shouldn't carry. By dawn, Daniel had made his decision. He wouldn't confront Mark directly. Not yet. He would pay attention, note everything, and build a picture that couldn't be ignored. His years in the military had taught him how to observe, how to wait, how to strike only when the moment was right. This wasn't war, but some lessons still applied. That morning, as he dropped by Rachel's house again to take Emily for school pickup, he noticed details he hadn't before. A dent on the hallway wall near shoulder height. Emily's small backpack resting neatly by the door, though she avoided looking at it when she grabbed it. Mark lounging in the living room, his smile polite but his eyes sharp, watching Daniel's every move. When Emily ran to Daniel, hugging him tightly, he crouched to her level. "Ready for school, kiddo?" She nodded eagerly, but her eyes darted nervously toward the living room before she whispered, "Yes?" It was subtle, but it was enough to confirm Daniel's instincts. Something was wrong in that house. As they walked out together, Daniel felt the tension in Emily's hand relax the farther they got from the door. He looked down at her and made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. The following afternoon, Daniel parked outside Jefferson Elementary, leaning against his truck as parents gathered near the entrance. The September air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp leaves and the faint laughter of children spilling out of the building. He had promised Emily he'd be there when school let out, and when she spotted him through the crowd, her face lit up with a smile that momentarily eased his worries. She ran into his arms, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. "Daddy." "You came." "Of course I did," he said, lifting her briefly off the ground before setting her down. "How was school today?" "It was good. We had art, and I painted a dog," she said brightly, though her eyes darted away when he asked more about her day. It was that same hesitation, the same subtle avoidance that gnawed at him. As they walked toward the parking lot, a voice called out behind them. "Sergeant Hayes?" Daniel turned to see a woman approaching, her expression kind but cautious. She was in her early 40s with warm brown eyes and a cardigan pulled snug around her shoulders. "I'm Mrs. Thompson, Emily's teacher. We haven't met before." Daniel shook her hand firmly. "Ma'am, it's good to meet you. I've been overseas, so I haven't been around much. But I'm back now. Mrs." Thompson smiled gently. "Emily talks about you often. She's very proud of you." Her tone softened as she glanced at Emily, who was now tugging Daniel's sleeve, eager to leave. "If you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you privately." Daniel's stomach tightened. He crouched to Emily's level. "Sweetheart, can you sit on that bench and draw in your notebook for a few minutes?" "I'll be right here." Emily nodded reluctantly, pulling out her crayons. As she settled on the bench, Daniel turned back to the teacher. Mrs. Thompson lowered her voice. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've noticed some changes in Emily recently. She used to be very outgoing, chatting with classmates, raising her hand in class. Lately she's been quiet, withdrawn." Daniel's jaw clenched. "I've noticed that too. Is there anything specific?" "She seems tired some mornings, distracted, and a few weeks ago she came in with a scrape on her arm that she brushed off as nothing." Mrs. Thompson hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes children go through phases, or it could be something at school. There have been incidents of bullying on the playground, but Emily hasn't said anything directly." "Bullying," Daniel repeated, though his instincts told him it wasn't that simple. "Has she ever mentioned names, or told you anything about home?" The teacher shook her head. "No, she tends to shut down if pressed too much. But I wanted to let you know because, well, you seem like the kind of parent who wants to stay informed." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. You did the right thing." When he returned to Emily, she looked up with her usual smile, holding up a drawing of a flower. "See? I made this while you talked." "It's beautiful," Daniel said, though his mind was still reeling from the teacher's words. He walked Emily to the truck, fastening her seatbelt carefully, noticing how small her hands looked as they fumbled with the strap. As they drove, he asked gently, "Hey, Em, do kids at school ever bother you?" She hesitated, then shook her head quickly. "No. Everyone's nice." Her voice was too fast, too practiced, and it confirmed his suspicion that she was hiding something again. Daniel didn't push further. Instead, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror and thought of Mrs. Thompson's careful warning. It wasn't just at home that Emily carried her silence. It followed her to school too, and that silence spoke louder than any words. The next weekend, Daniel returned to Rachel's house to pick up Emily for the day. His chest tightened the moment he saw Mark's car in the driveway. He tried to steady himself, reminding his heart that anger wouldn't help Emily. But the sight of that man lounging where he once belonged ignited a quiet storm inside him. Rachel opened the door, her expression tired. She's almost ready, she said, stepping aside. Emily came running down the hall, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. "Daddy!" She leapt into his arms, her joy so pure that for a moment it eased the heaviness inside him. But the peace didn't last. Mark appeared from the kitchen, sipping coffee, his smile carrying the same polished arrogance Daniel had come to despise. "Big day planned for you two?" he asked casually. Daniel kept his voice even. "Just some time together, that's all she needs." Rachel's arms crossed defensively. "She needs stability, Daniel, not just visits whenever you decide to show up." His jaw tightened. "Stability doesn't mean ignoring the fact that she has bruises." Rachel's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "We've already been over this." She said it was an accident. "Are you really going to keep pressing your daughter until she starts saying what you want to hear?" Emily's small frame shifted against Daniel's chest, her arms tightening around him. She buried her face in his shoulder, as though trying to disappear. "Rachel," Daniel said quietly, "do you even hear yourself? She's 7. She shouldn't be scared of telling the truth." "But she is, you can see it." Mark set his mug down with a clink. "You know what I think? You're projecting. You've been gone so long, you're desperate to find something wrong, just to feel relevant again." The words landed like a slap. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing his voice to stay calm even as rage surged in his veins. "This isn't about me. It's about Emily." Rachel stepped forward, her face flushed with frustration. "And I'm telling you, stop making this house a battlefield. She needs peace, Daniel, not parents ripping each other apart." Emily's quiet voice broke through, trembling. "Please don't fight." Her plea cut through the room like a knife. Daniel swallowed hard, softening his hold on her. "We're not fighting, baby." "I promise." Rachel turned away, her shoulders tense. "Take her for the day, just bring her back on time." Daniel carried Emily outside, his chest heavy with the sound of her small sobs muffled against his shirt. He buckled her into the truck, crouched to her level and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Hey, it's okay, you don't have to be scared, not with me." She nodded faintly, but didn't speak. As Daniel slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. The clash inside that house echoed louder than any gunfire he had heard overseas. But this battlefield was different. It wasn't just about winning. It was about saving a child who was learning to hide her pain in silence. The drive was quiet for several miles until Emily whispered, "I like being with you, Daddy. It feels safe." Daniel glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his heart tightening. "That's all I want, sweetheart. To keep you safe." Her small smile flickered, fragile but real. Daniel knew then that the fight ahead wasn't going to be easy. Rachel's denial, Mark's arrogance, Emily's silence, they were walls he had to break through, and he would. Because the cost of failure wasn't his pride, it was his daughter's trust, her safety, her childhood, and he wasn't about to lose that battle. That night, long after dropping Emily back at Rachel's house, Daniel sat alone in his apartment with the lights off. The silence pressed heavy against him, broken only by the occasional car passing outside. He had faced combat zones, endless nights of waiting for dawn with adrenaline coursing through his veins, but none of it compared to the helplessness he felt now. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, but rest didn't come. Instead, memories forced themselves forward, desert winds whipping sand into his face, the sudden crack of gunfire, the echo of shouted orders. He remembered a boy in a dusty street, eyes filled with fear, not so different from Emily's eyes when she clung to him. His chest tightened, his breathing uneven. He rubbed his temples, trying to ground himself in the present, but the battlefield in his mind was relentless. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Amanda holding a bag of takeout. She studied him with a worried look. "You didn't answer your phone. Thought you could use dinner." Daniel tried to smile, but it was thin. "You read me too well." Inside, she placed the food on the table and sat across from him. "Talk to me, Danny. What's going on in that head of yours?" He hesitated before admitting, "I can't stop replaying it. The marks on her face, the way she freezes when I ask questions. I've handled interrogations, ambushes, firefights, but this feels impossible." I'm supposed to protect her, and I don't even know how. Amanda's eyes softened. You've been trained to fight enemies you can see, but this isn't that kind of war. It's about patience, about showing her you'll never walk away. Daniel dropped his gaze. Patience has never been my strong suit. In the field, hesitation gets people killed. Here, I don't know what the rules are. She reached over and squeezed his hand. The rule is simple: be her anchor. She doesn't need a soldier charging into battle. She needs her dad to sit with her, listen, and prove she's safe. The words settled into him like a slow balm. He wanted to believe it was that simple, but deep inside he feared his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive, might ruin everything here. Amanda studied him carefully. You're carrying more than just Emily's fear, aren't you? Daniel exhaled, voice low. Sometimes I wake up sweating, hearing sounds that aren't there. Doors slamming feel like explosions. And when I saw those bruises on her face, it was like I was back overseas facing something I couldn't control. Amanda's voice was steady. That's not weakness, Danny. That's your body remembering. But you're here now, not there, and you don't have to carry it alone. For a long moment he stared at the takeout bag between them, the smell of fried chicken filling the room. Finally he nodded. I just don't want her to grow up thinking I wasn't enough, that I didn't fight for her. Amanda leaned closer, her tone unwavering. Then fight differently. Fight with patience, with love, with proof. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do. Her words struck something inside him. For the first time in days, the storm in his chest eased, even if only slightly. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was a father, and the battlefield was his daughter's trust. As Amanda left, Daniel stood at the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. The night air cooled against his skin, carrying with it the faintest sense of resolve. He couldn't erase the past, but he could shape the future, and for Emily's sake, he would. The following week, Daniel began to notice things he had missed before. It wasn't only Emily's hesitation or Rachel's defensiveness, it was the way neighbors glanced toward the house, the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked by. There were stories floating in the air, fragments waiting to be pieced together. One evening, as Daniel parked his truck along the street, Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, waved him over from her porch. She had always been kind, baking cookies for Emily when she was younger. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and her eyes carried both warmth and caution. Daniel, she called softly, come sit a minute. He joined her on the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. She folded her hands and leaned closer. I don't want to meddle, but since you've been back, I think you should know. Sometimes I hear shouting from your ex-wife's house, at night, mostly when Rachel's not home. Daniel's stomach twisted. Shouting? From who? Mrs. Garcia hesitated. The man she's with, Mark, I believe. I can't always make out the words, but the tone, it's angry, sharp. And sometimes I hear Emily crying afterward. The words hit him harder than any blow he'd taken overseas. He clenched his jaw, forcing his voice steady. Why didn't anyone say anything sooner? Her eyes softened with regret. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to cause trouble if it was nothing. But seeing you back, I thought you should hear it. Daniel nodded, his gratitude heavy with frustration. Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. You did the right thing telling me. That night, the weight of her words followed him. He lay awake, torn between marching straight to the police or holding back. Reporting Mark could open an investigation, but if nothing was proven, it might backfire. Emily could end up in foster care, caught in the system. The thought made his chest tighten with dread. The next day, while walking Emily to school, she reached for his hand with unusual urgency. Daddy, can I stay with you more? Daniel glanced down, trying to keep his voice calm. Why, sweetheart? Don't you like being at home with Mum? She bit her lip and looked away. It's just, I like being with you. It feels better. Her words were simple, but Daniel heard the plea hidden underneath. He squeezed her hand gently. I'll always be here for you, Em. Always. Later, when Amanda stopped by his apartment, Daniel told her about Mrs. Garcia's confession. Amanda's eyes widened, anger flickering beneath her calm exterior. "That's serious, Danny. You can't ignore it." "I know," he admitted, pacing the room. "But if I go to the police without proof, Rachel will say I'm trying to sabotage her relationship. Courts don't like fathers who stir trouble. It could hurt my chances of getting Emily out of there." Amanda leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So what's your plan?" Daniel's gaze hardened. "I watch. I listen. I gather every detail until there's no denying what's happening." Amanda nodded slowly, though her worry didn't fade. "Just promise me you'll be careful. If you lose control, you could lose her." Her warning echoed in his mind long after she left. He was walking a tightrope, balancing his rage against his daughter's safety. One wrong step could cost everything. That evening, as Daniel drove past Rachel's house again, he noticed the curtains drawn tightly shut. The lights inside flickered, and faintly, just faintly, he thought he heard raised voices through the closed windows. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, his pulse quickening. He knew then that this wasn't paranoia. The danger inside that house was real. And if he didn't act carefully, it might consume Emily before he could save her. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Daniel had taken Emily to the park after school, letting her swing until the sky turned shades of purple and gold. She laughed at first, her voice carrying across the open space, but as the light dimmed, her joy quieted. By the time they sat on a bench with ice cream cones, she looked distracted, her little shoulders hunched as though carrying something too heavy for her frame. Daniel watched her carefully. "You okay, kiddo? You've been quiet all of a sudden." Emily licked her ice cream, avoiding his eyes. "I'm fine." But the way her voice cracked betrayed her. He leaned closer, his tone gentle but steady. "Emily, you know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all, I'll always believe you." She stayed silent, her small fingers fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. Finally her lip trembled. She whispered so softly, he almost didn't catch it. "It wasn't an accident." Daniel froze, his heart slammed against his chest. "What do you mean?" Tears welled in her eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground. "Mark. He got mad. I dropped juice on the carpet and he grabbed me too hard. That's how I got the bruise." The world seemed to narrow around Daniel, every sound fading except for the pounding in his ears. He forced himself to stay calm for her sake, though fury surged through him like wildfire. He swallowed hard, his voice low. "Has this happened before?" Emily hesitated, then nodded quickly as though afraid she had already said too much. "But he told me not to tell. He said Mommy would be sad if I did." Daniel's hands clenched on his knees. Every instinct screamed to march back to that house, to tear Mark apart piece by piece. But Amanda's words echoed in his head. One wrong move, and you could lose her. He drew in a slow, shaky breath, wrapping an arm around his daughter. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No one should ever lay a hand on you. Ever. Do you hear me?" She buried her face against his chest, crying quietly. "I was scared you'd go away again if I told you." Daniel's throat burned. He held her tighter. "Never. Nothing you say will ever make me leave you. You did the right thing telling me. I promise I'm not going anywhere." For a long while they sat like that, her sobs softening into sniffles. Daniel stroked her hair, each tear that soaked into his shirt fueling his resolve. He couldn't let this continue, not for another day. When Emily finally pulled back, her eyes red but steady, Daniel brushed her cheek gently. "I need you to trust me, okay? I'm going to take care of this. You don't have to be afraid anymore." She nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. That night, after dropping her back at Rachel's, Daniel sat in his truck for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He replayed Emily's words, the fear in her voice, the pain behind her tears. Rage threatened to swallow him whole, but beneath it burned something stronger, a vow. This was no longer about suspicion or unanswered questions. The truth was out now, raw and undeniable. Mark had crossed a line, and Daniel knew what he had to do. He wouldn't strike blindly, no matter how much he wanted to. He would be precise, careful, strategic, because his daughter's safety depended on it. As the night deepened around him, Daniel Hayes swore silently. He would end this, and nothing, not Mark, not Rachel's denial, not even the system, would stand in his way. The morning after Emily's confession, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. The bitter taste lingered, but he hardly noticed. Every word Emily had whispered the night before replayed in his mind, louder than any battlefield memory. He had promised her he wouldn't leave, that he would protect her, but promises weren't enough. He needed action, the kind that couldn't be undone by anger or impulse. By mid-morning, he found himself in the office of Linda Carter, a family attorney recommended by one of his fellow veterans. The office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish, the shelves lined with thick binders of legal codes. Linda was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with an air of calm authority that made Daniel feel both exposed and reassured. She listened carefully as he explained everything: his deployment, his limited custody, the bruises, and finally, Emily's confession. When he finished, silence hung between them for a moment, broken only by the faint ticking of a desk clock. Linda folded her hands. "Sergeant Hayes, what you're describing is serious, but you need to understand something. Family court doesn't operate on suspicion. It operates on evidence." Daniel's shoulders tensed. "She told me herself. Isn't that enough?" "It's a start," Linda said gently. But judges are cautious with children's words, especially when there's a possibility of coaching or influence. Rachel's attorney would argue you're planting doubts because of your history with her and because you've been absent due to deployments. The words stung, but Daniel knew she wasn't wrong. His absences had left gaps Mark had stepped into. "So what do I do?" "You document everything," Linda replied firmly. "Every bruise, every sign, every statement Emily makes, and we build a case from the ground up. I'll file a petition to revisit custody, but you have to be prepared. It won't be quick. The court values stability, and right now Rachel has primary custody. That will weigh against you." Daniel leaned back in his chair, frustration simmering. "So while we wait, she's still in that house with him?" Linda's gaze softened, though her voice remained steady. "I know it feels unbearable, but rash action could backfire. If you confront Mark violently, or if you accuse Rachel without proof, you risk losing any chance of gaining custody." Daniel's fists tightened on his knees. The idea of patience felt like torture, but Emily's safety depended on strategy, not rage. He forced himself to nod. "Then I'll do whatever it takes." Linda gave him a small, approving smile. "Good. You're a soldier. You know about discipline. Apply that same discipline here. We'll need school records, testimony from teachers, maybe even neighbors. Piece by piece, we'll build the truth until the court can't ignore it." When Daniel left her office, the midday sun was bright, but he felt the weight of the task pressing heavier than his rucksack had ever been. He drove in silence, thoughts swirling. Every mile reminded him that this wasn't about winning a battle for pride. It was about proving he was the safest place for his daughter. That evening, Amanda stopped by, reading the frustration on his face before he spoke a word. "So, what did the lawyer say?" "That I need evidence," Daniel muttered, pacing the living room. "Proof. Without it, the system won't listen." Amanda placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. "Then you'll get it. You're not alone in this. You've got me and you've got Emily. That's enough to keep moving forward." Her words steadied him, though the fire inside burned hotter. He thought of Emily's small hand gripping his, her trembling voice confessing the truth. He couldn't afford to falter. He had a new mission now, not in a foreign land, but right here in courtrooms and quiet observations. And no matter how long it took, he would see it through. The weeks that followed were a blur of tight smiles and hidden storms. Daniel visited Emily as often as he could, each moment a reminder of what he was fighting for. Yet every return to Rachel's house was a test of his patience. One evening, when Daniel came to drop Emily off, Mark was waiting by the door. He leaned against the frame with an air of smug ownership, his arms crossed as though daring Daniel to step out of line. "You sure like playing hero, don't you?" Mark said, his tone light but laced with venom. Daniel kept his jaw tight. "I don't play at anything, I protect my daughter." "That's not a role, it's who I am." Mark smirked. "Funny, you weren't around much when she needed you most. Guess being a part-time dad makes it easier to pretend you're the good guy now." The words landed like punches. Daniel's instinct screamed to respond with force, but he forced himself to inhale slowly. Losing control wasn't an option. "Say what you want about me. But don't forget, Emily's watching. She sees everything, and she knows the difference between someone who loves her and someone who scares her." Mark's smirk faltered for a split second, but before Daniel could press further, Rachel stepped into the hallway. "What's going on?" "Just chatting," Mark replied smoothly, his charm sliding back into place. Rachel's eyes flicked between them, suspicion clear. "Daniel, you can't keep coming here and starting conflicts. You're making things harder for Emily." Daniel's voice was calm but steady. "Rachel, you need to open your eyes. She's pulling away, shutting down. That's not what happy children do. You can't keep pretending nothing's wrong." Her arms crossed tightly. "You're seeing what you want to see. Mark's been supportive and Emily has a stable home here. Maybe she's struggling because of the back and forth, because you pop in and disrupt her routine." Emily appeared in the doorway of her room, clutching her stuffed bear. Her eyes darted nervously between the adults. She didn't speak, but the way she pressed herself against the wall told Daniel everything. He crouched slightly, softening his tone. "Hey, I'll see you in a couple of days, okay? We'll go to the park again." She gave a faint nod, but her grip on the bear only tightened. Rachel's expression hardened. "See? You're making her anxious. Can't you just respect the life we're trying to build here?" Daniel straightened, his eyes locking onto hers. "Respect doesn't mean ignoring bruises and fear. Respect means listening when a child is crying out, even if it's in silence." The room felt suffocating, tension so thick it pressed against Daniel's chest. He forced himself to step back, not out of weakness, but because he knew the battlefield wasn't this hallway. It was the courtroom waiting ahead. On his way out, Mark muttered under his breath, just loud enough to sting, "You won't win." Daniel paused, his hand gripping the doorframe. He didn't turn around, but his voice was steady. "I don't care about winning. I care about Emily. That's the difference between us." The door shut behind him with a heavy finality. As Daniel walked back to his truck, the cool night air hit him, clearing his head. He could still see Emily's eyes, wide with unspoken fear, following him as he left. That image carved itself deep inside him, sharper than any wound he had carried from war. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he drove away. Each encounter made the danger clearer, the urgency stronger. Rachel's blindness, Mark's arrogance, Emily's silence, they were walls he had to break through, and he would, because nothing, not fear, not denial, not the weight of the system, would stop him from protecting his daughter. The first break in Daniel's struggle came from an unexpected place. One Monday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Thompson, Emily's teacher. Her voice carried a mix of concern and relief. "Sergeant Hayes, I filed a formal report today," she said. "Emily has been quieter than ever, and her drawings, they've changed. I couldn't stay silent any longer." Daniel's heart raced. "A report? To who?" "The school counselor and Child Protective Services," Mrs. Thompson explained. "It's procedure." "I know it's frightening, but it may bring the truth to light." He thanked her, his voice rough with gratitude. For weeks, he had felt like the only one seeing the signs. Now, finally, someone else had stepped forward. That same evening, Amanda came by with dinner, her eyes scanning his face. "You look different," she said, placing the bag on the table. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Mrs. Thompson reported Emily's changes. It's official now. People are noticing. I'm not crazy." Amanda's shoulders relaxed. "That's huge, Danny. You've got an ally in the system." But even as relief washed over him, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. He still had to prove to the court that Emily was better off with him, and proof meant more than suspicions. 2 days later, a patrol car appeared outside Rachel's house. The sight made Daniel's stomach twist, but he stayed back, watching from a distance. Two officers stepped inside while Emily was at school. The visit was short, but its weight was enormous. Word would spread, and Rachel would not take it lightly. That evening Rachel called him, her voice sharp with fury. "Did you do this? Did you sick the cops on my home?" "I didn't," Daniel replied, his tone calm. "But I'm glad someone did. Emily deserves to be safe." "You're poisoning everyone against us," she snapped. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you're tearing this family apart." "This family was already broken," Daniel answered quietly. "And I'm trying to keep our daughter from breaking with it." She hung up before he could say more. The silence on the line rang like a gunshot in his ears. Days later, Mrs. Garcia knocked on Daniel's door, holding a folded piece of paper. Her hands shook slightly as she handed it to him. "I wrote everything down," she said. "The nights I heard shouting. The times I heard Emily crying when Rachel wasn't home. If you need someone to speak up, I will." Daniel took the paper carefully, his throat tight. "Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. You don't know what this means." Her kind eyes met his. "I do. That little girl needs someone who won't look away." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt momentum. Allies were stepping forward, a teacher, a neighbor, even the law. The walls around Emily's silence were beginning to crack. That night, as he sat across from Amanda at his kitchen table, he allowed himself a rare moment of hope. "We're not alone anymore. I think we're finally getting somewhere." Amanda smiled softly. "You've been fighting like a soldier. But look around, Danny, you're building an army. People see Emily and they care, that matters." He nodded, the fire in his chest steadying into resolve. He thought of Emily's small smile in the truck, her whisper about feeling safe with him. He couldn't fail her, not now, not when the tide was beginning to turn. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Daniel knew one thing with absolute clarity. The truth was rising to the surface, and soon it would be impossible to deny. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a place where countless lives had been dissected and judged. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table, his hands clasped tightly, his uniform jacket pressed and neat as if it could give him the steadiness he needed. He had faced enemy fire before, but this, waiting for a judge to decide his daughter's fate, was a different kind of battlefield. Rachel sat across from him, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark was beside her, wearing a suit that didn't quite mask his smug confidence. His eyes darted toward Daniel with the same arrogance Daniel had come to know too well. When the judge entered, the room rose. Daniel's pulse hammered as the proceedings began. His attorney, Linda Carter, opened with steady words, outlining Emily's bruises, her withdrawal at school, and the testimonies collected. She spoke of concern, not accusation, painting Daniel not as a soldier on the attack, but as a father desperate to protect. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle. "Emily used to be lively in class. She's changed. She hesitates, she avoids eye contact, and her drawings show distress. I filed a report because I could no longer ignore it." Rachel's attorney pressed her. "Isn't it possible Emily is simply adjusting to her father's return?" Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "I've been teaching for 20 years. I know the difference between adjustment and fear. This is fear." Next came Mrs. Garcia. Her hands trembled as she unfolded her statement, but her voice carried strength. "I've heard shouting from the house when Rachel wasn't home, shouting from Mark, and I've heard Emily crying afterward. No child cries like that over spilled milk. Something is wrong." Daniel watched as Rachel shifted uncomfortably beside Mark, but still she clung to denial. When Rachel took the stand, her words were sharp, defensive. "Daniel is overreacting. He's been gone for most of Emily's life, and now he wants to tear apart the stable home I've built. Mark has been nothing but supportive. These accusations are fueled by jealousy and guilt." Mark followed, his voice polished, his demeanor rehearsed. "Emily's a sweet kid, but Daniel projects his issues onto her. He's back from war and doesn't know how to adjust. He sees enemies where there are none." Daniel's fists clenched under the table, but he stayed silent, remembering Linda's advice. Let the truth speak for itself. Finally, it was Emily's turn. She walked hesitantly to the front, clutching her bear. The judge leaned forward kindly. "Emily, do you know why you're here today?" Her small voice quivered. "Because people are worried about me." "That's right," the judge said gently. "And I need to hear from you. Can you tell me what happened?" Emily glanced at Daniel, who gave her a reassuring nod. She took a shaky breath. "I had a bruise because Mark grabbed me. He got mad when I spilled juice. He told me not to tell, but I don't like it. I get scared." The room fell silent. Every word was like a weight dropping into place. Rachel's face went pale, her denial cracking at last. Mark's confidence faltered, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tight. Daniel's heart broke and swelled all at once, broken that she had to speak these words, but proud that she had found the courage. The judge's voice was calm but firm. "Thank you, Emily. You've been very brave today." The hearing concluded with tension thick in the air. The judge didn't give a verdict right away, announcing that the decision would be delivered after review. As Daniel left the courtroom, his steps felt heavy, but his resolve had never been clearer. Emily had spoken. The truth was out. Now it was in the court's hands. The day of the verdict arrived under a sky streaked with grey, as though the weather carried the same weight as Daniel's heart. He sat in the courtroom once again, his hands folded tightly, every nerve inside him braced for the words that would shape his daughter's future. The judge's voice carried steady authority as she read from the bench. "After careful review of testimonies, reports and evidence, this court finds it in the best interest of the child, Emily Hayes, that primary custody be awarded to her father, Sergeant Daniel Hayes. Visitation rights will remain open to her mother, with the condition that Mr. Mark Collins is to have no unsupervised contact with the child." For a moment the world stilled. Daniel blinked, the words sinking into him like sunlight breaking through clouds. He looked at Emily, seated beside Amanda, and saw her eyes widen in relief, a small smile breaking through her nervous expression. His throat tightened, tears threatening, but he swallowed them back. This was her victory, not his. Rachel, on the other hand, covered her face with her hands, tears spilling freely. She whispered hoarsely, "I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." Mark muttered something under his breath, his jaw locked, but the gavel struck, ending his presence in Emily's life with a finality he couldn't undo. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. Emily clung to Daniel's hand, her voice small but steady. "Does this mean I get to stay with you now?" Daniel knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. You'll be with me. And you'll be safe." Her smile grew, fragile but real. She whispered, "I knew you'd come for me." Those words carved themselves into Daniel's heart. He wrapped her in his arms, holding her close, knowing this embrace was different from the one on the porch weeks ago. Back then, joy had been tainted with fear. Now, it was filled with hope. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Daniel found a modest two-bedroom house near the base, with a yard big enough for Emily to play. He painted her room in soft lavender, hanging her drawings on the walls just as she had asked. At night, when he tucked her in, she would sometimes cling a little tighter, afraid he might disappear again. But each time he reminded her, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Rachel visited under supervision, her eyes heavy with guilt, but softer than before. One afternoon, as Daniel handed Emily over for a few hours, Rachel paused. "You were right, I ignored the signs. I wanted so badly to believe things were fine that I failed her." Daniel studied her quietly, then said, "What matters now is that you don't fail her again. She still needs her mum." Rachel nodded, her tears unhidden. "Thank you for not giving up." It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a step toward healing. One evening, Daniel sat on the porch while Emily played in the yard, the sound of her laughter filling the air like music. Amanda joined him with 2 mugs of coffee, smiling as she watched her niece chase fireflies. "You did it," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "No, we did. Emily did." She found her voice when it mattered most. Amanda's eyes glistened. "You gave her the strength to use it." For the first time in years, Daniel felt peace settle into his chest, Not the fragile peace of silence after battle, but the real kind. The peace of knowing his daughter could grow up safe, surrounded by love instead of fear. As the night deepened and Emily's laughter echoed across the yard, Daniel whispered to himself, "This is the only victory I'll ever need." And it was. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful journeys of resilience and family. And make sure to click the video on your screen now. You won't want to miss what comes next.